volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by D. Wyckoff. Off on a Comet by Jules Verne. Translated by Anonymous. Book 1, Chapter 16. The Residuum of a Continent. Almost unconsciously, the voyagers in the Dobrynia fell into the habit of using Gallia as the name of the new world in which they became aware they must be making an extraordinary excursion through the realms of space. Nothing, however, was allowed to divert them from their ostensible object of making a survey of the coast of the Mediterranean, and accordingly they persevered in following that singular boundary which had revealed itself to their extreme astonishment. Having rounded the great promontory that had barred her further progress to the north, the schooner skirted its upper edge. A few more leagues and they ought to be abreast of the shores of France. Yes, of France. But who shall describe the feelings of Hector Servadac when, instead of the charming outline of his native land, he beheld nothing but a solid boundary of savage rock? Who shall paint the look of consternation with which he gazed upon the stony rampart, rising perpendicularly for 1,000 feet, that had replaced the shores of the smiling south? Who shall reveal the burning anxiety with which he throbbed to see beyond that cruel wall? But there seemed no hope. Onwards and onwards the yacht made her way, and still no sign of France. It might have been supposed that Servadac's previous experiences would have prepared him for the discovery that the catastrophe which had overwhelmed other sites had brought destruction to his own country as well, but he had failed to realize how it might extend to France, and when now he was obliged with his own eyes to witness the waves of ocean rolling over what once had been the lovely shores of Provence, he was well nigh frantic with desperation. Am I to believe that Gourbi Island, that little shred of Algeria, constitutes all that is left of our glorious France? No, no, it cannot be. Not yet have we reached the pole of our new world. There must be, something more behind that frowning rock. Oh, that for a moment we could scale its towering height and look beyond! By heaven, I adjure you, let us disembark and mount the summit and explore. France lies beyond. Disembarkation, however, was an utter impossibility. There was no semblance of a creek in which the Dobrynia could find an anchorage. There was no outlying ridge on which a footing could be gained. The precipice was perpendicular as a wall, its topmost height crowned with the same conglomerate of crystallized lamellae that had all along been so pronounced a feature. With her steam at high pressure, the yacht made rapid progress towards the east. The weather remained perfectly fine. The temperature became gradually cooler, so that there was little prospect of vapors accumulating in the atmosphere, and nothing more than a few cirri, almost transparent, veiled here and there the clear azure of the sky. Throughout the day the pale rays of the sun, apparently lessened in its magnitude, cast only faint and somewhat uncertain shadows, but at night the stars shone with surpassing brilliancy. Of the planets, some, it was observed, seemed to be fading away in remote distance. This was the case with Mars, Venus, and that unknown orb which was moving in the orbit of the minor planets. But Jupiter, on the other hand, had assumed splendid proportions. Saturn was superb in its luster, and Uranus, which hitherto had been imperceptible without a telescope, was pointed out by Lieutenant Procope, plainly visible to the naked eye. The inference was irresistible that Gallia was receding from the sun and traveling far away across the planetary regions. On the 24th of February, after following the sinuous course of what before the date of the convulsion had been the coastline of the department of Var, and after a fruitless search of the Hères, the peninsula of Saint-Tropez, the Larius Islands, and the gulfs of Cannes and Jouarre, the Dobryna arrived upon the site of the Cape of Antibes. Here, quite unexpectedly, the explorers made the discovery that the massive wall of cliff had been rent from the top to the bottom by a narrow rift, like the dry bed of a mountain torrent, and at the base of the opening, level with the sea, was a little strand upon which there was just space enough for their boat to be hauled up. "Joy, joy!" shouted Servadac, half beside himself with ecstasy. "We can land at last." Count Timascheff and the lieutenant were scarcely less impatient than the captain, and little needed his urgent and repeated solicitations. "Come on, quick, come on, no time to lose." It was 7:30 in the morning when they set their foot upon this untried land. The bit of strand was only a few square yards in area, quite a narrow strip. Upon it might have been recognized some fragments of that agglutination of yellow limestone which is characteristic of the coast of Provence. But the whole party was far too eager to await and examine these remnants of the ancient shore. They hurried on to scale the heights. The narrow ravine was not only perfectly dry, but manifestly had never been the bed of any mountain torrent. The rocks that rested at the bottom, just as those which formed its sides, were of the same lamellous formation as the entire coast, and had not hitherto been subject to the disaggregation which the lapse of time never fails to work. A skilled geologist would probably have been able to assign them their proper scientific classification, but neither Servadac, Timascheff, nor the lieutenant could pretend to any acquaintance with their specific character. Although, however, the bottom of the chasm had never as yet been the channel of a stream, indications were not wanting that at some future time it would be the natural outlet of accumulated waters, for already in many places thin layers of snow were glittering upon the surface of the fractured rocks, and the higher the elevation that was gained, the more these layers were found to increase in area and in depth. "Here is a trace of fresh water, the first that Gallia has exhibited," said the Count to his companions as they toiled up the precipitous path. "And probably," replied the lieutenant, "as we ascend we shall find not only snow but ice. We must suppose this Gallia of ours to be a sphere, and if it is so, we must now be very close to her Arctic regions. It is true that her axis is not so much inclined as to prolong day and night as at the poles of the earth, but the rays of the sun must reach us here only very obliquely, and the cold in all likelihood will be intense." "So cold, do you think," asked Servadac, "that animal life must be extinct?" "I do not say that, Captain," answered the lieutenant, "for however far our little world may be removed from the sun, I do not see why its temperature should fall below what prevails in those outlying regions beyond our system where sky and air are not." "And what temperature may that be?" inquired the captain with a shudder. Fourier estimates that even in those vast unfathomable tracts, the temperature never descends lower than 60 degrees, said Procope. 60 degrees below zero, cried the Count. Why, there's not a Russian could endure it. I beg your pardon, Count, it is placed on record that the English have survived it, or something quite approximate, upon their Arctic expeditions. When Captain Parry was on Melville Island, he knew the thermometer to fall to 56 degrees, said Procope. As the explorers advanced, they seemed glad to pause from time to time that they might recover their breath, for the air, becoming more and more rarefied, made respiration somewhat difficult and the ascent fatiguing. Before they had reached an altitude of 600 feet, they noticed a sensible diminution of the temperature, but neither cold nor fatigue deterred them, and they resolved to persevere. Fortunately, the deep stria, or furrows in the surface of the rock that made the bottom of the ravine, in some degree facilitated their progress, but it was not until they had been toiling up for 2 hours more that they succeeded in reaching the summit of the cliff. Eagerly and anxiously did they look around. To the south there was nothing but the sea they had traversed. To the north nothing but one drear, inhospitable stretch. Servadac could not suppress a cry of dismay. Where was his beloved France? Had he gained this arduous height only to behold the rocks carpeted with ice and snow, and reaching interminably to the far-off horizon? His heart sank within him. The whole region appeared to consist of nothing but the same strange uniform mineral conglomerate, crystallized into regular hexagonal prisms. But whatever was its geological character, it was only too evident that it had entirely replaced the former soil, so that not a vestige of the old continent of Europe could be discerned. The lovely scenery of Provence, with the grace of its rich and undulating landscape, its gardens of citrons and oranges rising tier upon tier from the deep red soil, all had vanished. Of the vegetable kingdom there was not a single representative. The most meager of Arctic plants, the most insignificant of lichens, could obtain no hold upon that stony waste, nor did the animal world assert the feeblest sway. The mineral kingdom reigned supreme. Captain Servadac's deep dejection was in strange contrast to his general hilarity. Silent and tearful, he stood upon an ice-bound rock, straining his eyes across the boundless vista of the mysterious territory. "It cannot be," he exclaimed. "We must somehow have mistaken our bearings. True, we have encountered this barrier, but France is there beyond. Yes, France is there. Come, Count, come, by all that's pitiful, I entreat you. Come and explore the farthest verge of the ice-bound track." He pushed onwards along the rugged surface of the rock, but had not proceeded far before he came to a sudden pause. His foot had come in contact with something hard beneath the snow, and stooping down he picked up a little block of stony substance, which the first glance revealed to be of a geological character altogether alien to the universal rocks around. It proved to be a fragment of discolored marble, on which several letters were inscribed, of which the only part at all decipherable was the syllable "vil." "Villa!" he cried out in his excitement, dropping the marble, which was broken into atoms by the fall. What else could this fragment be but the sole surviving remnant of some sumptuous mansion that once had stood on this unrivaled site? Was it not the residue of some edifice that had crowned the luxuriant headland of Antibes, overlooking Nice, and commanding the gorgeous panorama that embraced the maritime Alps, and reached beyond Monaco and Mentone to the Italian height of Bordighera? And did it not give in its sad and too convincing testimony that Antibes itself had been involved in the great destruction? Servadac gazed upon the shattered marble, pensive and disheartened. Count Timascheff laid his hand kindly on the captain's shoulder, and said, "My friend, do you not remember the motto of the old Hope family?" He shook his head mournfully. "Orbe fracto spes illo esse," continued the Count. "Though the world be shattered, hope is unimpaired." Servadac smiled faintly, and replied that he felt rather compelled to take up the despairing cry of Dante, "All hope abandon, ye who enter here." "Nay, not so," answered the Count. "For the present, at least, let our maxim be nil desperandum." End of Book 1, Chapter 16.